This lecture deals with two of the major foreign policy issues under Kennedy's presidency. So one of the biggest ones is dealing with Cuba in the Bay of Pigs. So Cuba became a communist nation under Fidel Castro during Eisenhower's presidency. So as a reaction to this, obviously we are quite afraid that Cuba, an island only 90 miles off the coast of Florida, is becoming communist, and the Soviet Union is kind of obviously helping them. Under Eisenhower, they had created a plan where the CIA was going to train Guatemalans and exiled Cubans to invade Cuba in this Bay of Pigs, this area where we felt it would be an easy entrance into Cuba. Kennedy allowed the plan to continue because he thought the Cubans would welcome the opportunity to overthrow Fidel Castro. So he's thinking that they don't like him, that the plan is already in place, so we will go with what Eisenhower had done. So U.S. feared that Castro was becoming an ally of the Soviet Union, so eventually Kennedy allows for this invasion to launch. Part of the invasion, though, was for the United States Air Force to fly over the Bay of Pigs to do some bombing so that it would kind of clear the way for the exiles to come in, so it looked kind of like they were doing it, not us. Kennedy pulled the Air Force back kind of at the last minute, so when the Guatemalan and Cuban exiles get there, they are completely obliterated. It is an embarrassment for Kennedy because we try to kind of cover up our involvement. Eventually he goes on national network television and says, yes, we did this. This was kind of a failure, and I take full responsibility for it. So we see that kind of the first major foreign policy thing is a complete failure for him. That is not the only one. While he is president, the Berlin Wall is constructed, which divides East Berlin and West Berlin by the Soviet Union. So we see the conflict with the Soviet Union is getting closer to us in Cuba, and that it is spreading to areas or is getting worse in areas where it already existed, like in Europe. So the Soviet Union is building this wall in order to try to keep the Allies out of West Berlin. It doesn't really work. We continue to supply them, but it definitely becomes a major symbol of the Cold War, and it's a divided city. So in order to do this, there's a U-2 spy plane incident over the Soviet Union, where we are flying a plane and it gets seen and shot down, and a guy named Gary Powers, a U.S. Air Force pilot, is held captive. Eventually we get him back, but it's shown embarrassment on the case of the Americans with the Bay of Pigs, with the U-2 spy incident. So Stalin died, and he is replaced by a guy named Khrushchev. And he says, Allies, you got to get out of West Berlin. So he starts building the wall to kind of encapsulate them. And you can see kind of the heightening of the Cold War during this time period. So you see images like this where people tried to communicate with family members that happened to be on the other side of the wall when it was being built or when the city was being divided. And they are divided until 1989 when the wall comes down. So it becomes a major symbol of the Cold War, and when it does come down in 1989, that's not literally the end of the Cold War, but it's a big step towards it ending. And it's not just the wall. I mean, it's a wall of over 100 miles, but it was impossible because there's mines, there's attack dogs, there's armed guards with shoot-to-kill orders. So family and friends found themselves separated, and most Berliners were lucky just to establish any visual contact over the wall. There's virtually no communication between the two sides of the wall. At least 2.7 million people attempted to escape by climbing, vaulting, tunneling, crashing through checkpoints. Others attempted to swim across canals or stow away in cargo ships, and many of them will not survive. We saw, as I said, a lot of them will result in deaths at the hands of these East German guards. Official figures are about 400 people died, and human rights activists trying to escape. However, they estimate that number might be closer to 800. So it's quite a few people, obviously, who are going to lose their lives simply because they're trying to get onto the other side of the wall. So in reaction to the wall being built, Kennedy does fly to West Berlin, and he urges the Soviets to tear down the Berlin Wall, but he also reassures the West Berliners that we will not abandon them. Even though Khrushchev wants us out, and we are being forced kind of to be encapsulated by this wall. We are not going to leave them alone. We're going to continue to supply them and support them until the wall eventually comes down. And as I said, it's not till 1989 where eventually the restrictions are lifted and the wall comes down, and eventually Germany is made, not only just Berlin, but all of Germany is made one country as of October 3rd of 1990. And this becomes a massive symbol of the end of the Cold War and an end to communism. But again, the wall is going to last for nearly 30 years. So Kennedy is seen as relatively successful in continuing American support, but the wall still gets built under his watch, and the Cold War is clearly getting heightened during this time period.